Hi! Now, when we talk about enamel hand painting, let me show you what I mean first. This. All enamel hand painted. This copper part, I could have masked this, but I decided to hand paint it. This, 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 this. Here's the resin nightingale that I painted. This, 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 this. Hey everyone, Frosted Snow here. Today I'm going to be doing some enamel hand painting with you guys. It's actually quite a requested video. Now I believe that good and clean enamel hand painting is really 80% in knowledge and judgment and 20% in the hands. So if you decide to skip everything that I say and just watch me paint, then you might not get very good results. Whether your kit is painted or not, enamel hand painting can really help bring out the details. There's so much to know about lacquer, enamel, and acrylic paint. So the knowledge that I'm going to share with you are just things that I think are fundamental to enamel hand painting, and it's going to get you on your way. It's going to help you as you start, and as you move along, you will learn more and more about the different paints and what you can use and what you cannot use. So let's get on first to understanding paints and thinners. First, let's talk about the strength of paint and thinners. And when I say paint, paint includes thinners because paint is diluted with thinners, except for acrylic. Now, lacquer is the strongest paint, enamel next, and acrylic is the weakest. What this means is if you use enamel thinner to erase enamel paint, it will not erase the lacquer paint underneath. The lacquer paint underneath will stay as it is. So what's commonly done is you airbrush lacquer and then do any hand painting on top with enamel and acrylic. Usually, you would not airbrush enamel first and then airbrush lacquer on top and use lacquer thinner to erase the lacquer paint, because then you would also erase the weaker enamel paint at the bottom. So remember, the strongest paint first and consecutively with weaker and weaker paints. However, there's exceptions to everything. For example, if you'd like to top coat what you've hand painted, you should wait for the enamel paint to dry completely and then top coat it with lacquer paint. You also would not try to hand paint lacquer over lacquer and do any kind of erasing, because that would just take out everything. The nightingale's eyes are an example of where I broke some rules. I first sprayed it with black lacquer, hand painted with silver enamel, and then airbrushed again clear green lacquer. After you understand about paints, thinners, and how to use them, the next thing towards successful enamel hand painting is judgment of the parts. Being able to look at it and deciding, is this something I can paint well? Is it gonna come out clean? I look at a few things. The first is level difference. That is the difference between the distance of the surface you are going to paint and its surrounding or opposing surface. The more level difference, the better, because the paint will not drip to the sides. You can paint single protruding parts and multiple protruding parts. Another thing I consider is whether there is a defined panel line surrounding the part I'm going to paint, which make the paint leak much less. Sometimes, even if the part doesn't have a defined panel line, if the edge is clear enough, you can still paint the part. Also, I consider the surface area of the part I'm going to paint, and you can't paint parts that have too large of a surface area, or brush strokes of the enamel paint will be very visible. Now let's look at some parts I wouldn't really paint. Parts where the level difference is too small, the panel line is too thin, or the distance to the border of the part is too close and your brush might touch the edge, any mildly sloping parts without a clear edge and surface areas that are much too wide because brush strokes will become more and more visible. So these are the parts that I've chosen to hand paint. I just check in the manual and see which parts will show up underneath the clear armor or not. So let's take a look at some examples. Very good protruding part. These little dots are doable too. Round protruding parts, excellent parts to paint. Indented parts, you would just dip the enamel paint into this hole here. Multiple round protruding parts. You don't have to get like right onto the edge of this and make it perfect. Leave a little space in between. And this would also be all right to paint. And of course you'd have to paint down the side as well. Multiple protruding parts. I would just paint this whole part one color, although I'd really like to do the color separation. These little dots are also paintable. This as well, this little dot here. Indented part could be painted, but I don't think I'm not gonna go to doing that. I think this is gonna be enough. And you know, that's something you have to think about too when you do the enamel hand painting. You don't just paint every single thing on this part because it's gonna be really weird. This kit has a lot of parts, and if there are certain parts that are painted in like 10 different ways, whereas in the rest of the kit, there are also lots of other parts which are not painted at all. It's going to look really weird. So you have to think about that kind of balance as well. A protruding part that has not only a level difference, but also a clear panel line. This part can also be painted, this circle, and these dots can be painted as well. You could also paint these lines here. That would be this. You could paint those lines. You could paint these bolts, but again, as I said, balance is really important. So I wouldn't paint every single thing on this part. Rounded part that has a pretty clear border. It's not really a panel line, but this would be also excellent to paint. And these kind of parts I like to paint a clear color. It looks really good instead of metallic. Also, this whole tube will be super easy to paint. So these are some examples of things that you would paint very easily. Now, once you've got the knowledge of the paint down and you're able to judge which parts you should paint and which will have a higher success rate, the third thing is knowledge of the texture of the paint. That was pretty long. Oh, smells. Guys, enamel hand paint is very toxic. The tester paint on the bottle, this product contains a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer and birth defects or other reproductive harm. And I'm sure that all of these other enamel paints probably do the same thing, even though if it's not written on them. I get asked a lot what kind of enamel paints I use. I do use Testors. I think that they give a really good results for metallics, but I don't think the difference is big enough that you really need to go out of your way to find it. The other enamel hand paints, another enamel paints, what do you call it, hand paints, that we usually use are Tamiya, just whatever you can get your hands on. Oh, another reason why we have this really big booth and it's so great to be able to work inside it is when we do even this enamel hand painting, we do it inside of the booth, and the fan will take out most of the smell. But we do still wear a mask. Wear a mask, guys. Cancer is not cool. Now, there are basically two main tools used to do enamel hand painting. There is the brush and the other toothpicks. I generally prefer using the brush because I'm really comfortable with it. I also do a lot of miniature hand painting, not a lot, some. And this is just a chance for me to show off what I've done. So these are some miniatures that I've painted. They are Warhammer miniatures. The painting is actually quite intricate. And so I'm really comfortable with using a brush. I feel like the best thing about using a brush is it gives me the most control. It can cover a wider surface area more easily, but the con is that it can leave brush strokes. I did used to do enamel hand painting with just really cheap, like $1 brushes, and it worked fine. You can also use toothpicks, and the pros of toothpicks is that, well, it's cheap and very easily available, and it doesn't really leave brush strokes. But the major downside of this for me is that there's a lack of control. If I'm painting the edge of something, I find this not as easy to use as a brush. And also, this doesn't cover a wide surface area very easily. So if you've got quite a large part to hand paint, you're going to be poking at it quite a lot. Brush, dropper, toothpick, tray, mask, always mask, Testors, Tamiya, go. Forgot enamel thinner and a finish master. I use a tray to hold some thinner and always clean my brush during the entire process, but before I paint, I also clean my brush just to make sure there isn't anything left over on it. Now I am painting a round protruding part, and notice as I paint, and here is the key I think to hand painting with enamel, is you have to paint the highest area of the part, or the part where you can apply the most paint without it spilling over, because there's a lot of paint on your brush the first time you dip it into the paint. So you can see for all 4 parts, I am only painting the highest part of all the little protruding parts, and I don't dip my brush back into the paint. Now that I've gotten rid of most of the paint on my brush, I am now spreading out and painting the second highest area of the part on all 4 parts. I don't try to complete each one at a time. And I decided to finish it here and not go all the way to the edge, because remember, you're not really trying to get perfect results with enamel hand painting if you were going for that nude mask. Now, a lot of people ask me if I thin my enamel paint before using it, and you saw here that I dipped my brush into the tray to get a little bit of the thinner and then dip into the paint to thin it out a little bit if I feel it starts to get thick. And once you remove the cap and leave it out for a while, the paint in the cap does start to get thick. So that's how I thin it. I don't pour some enamel paint into the tray and thin it separately, because I find the paint as it comes in the can is already the best texture to paint with. Once you've used up most of your paint and it starts to get a bit dry in the bottle, you can use a dropper and add some thinner into it. Now I've made a little mistake here, and this is where the Finish Master wand comes in. I don't usually dip it right into the thinner bottle because you could get little particles into it. It's usually best to use the dropper, get a bit of thinner into the tray, and then dip your wand into it. And you can see this is how I remove my errors. Now, this is a part that I knew would be really hard to paint, but I really wanted to separate these little dots. And the reason why it's hard to paint is because you can see there is not really a clear level difference. The part is almost the same surface area as its surrounding parts. It doesn't protrude out much, but there is a very defined panel line surrounding it. And I'm literally using my 100% concentration to paint this part. I don't know if you can feel the tension, but I'm gonna let you watch it without my chitty chatty chatter, and we'll just enjoy the suspense unedited. Oh, one more thing before we do that is notice how I always use my pinky to stabilize my brushing hand against the part. Phew. Now we're going to move on to clear paints. Did you see what just happened here? A little static pulled the paint towards the part. Now when I paint clear enamel paints, these paints are much thicker than metallic, and I take them out of the cap a really big dab of paint. I don't try to use a little bit at a time, a big dab, and I don't stroke. Notice most of the painting I do, you don't stroke really much. You dab multiple short dabs. And it's getting a little bit dry. You see I dip the brush back into the paint. And whenever you re-dip and add some thinner to your brush, always be careful because your paint is going to be a bit thinner and it's going to run a little bit more easily. So you would never like go right to the edge. And here is the clear part. That's the edge. Now this is opaque. This is a Tamiya opaque red. And you can see I am starting at the highest point of the part and then going to spread the paint out to the second point of the part, the second highest point. And I never go right to the edge from the beginning, especially when paint is fresh on my brush. I think that's a common error if people feel like their paint job is a bit messy, and here it is done. Now here is a part with intrusions, not protruding. And these parts are really good to paint with a toothpick because the brush will leave a bit of stroke on the edge of the intrusion. And it's so easy to do these with a toothpick. Looks pretty good. And if there is a little bit of smear on the edge, I just use the Finish Master to clear it up.
Here is the finished product. I think the red came out relatively clean. Yep. And I went ahead and did the silver on these parts.
Silver from Testors.
There we go. Really not hard at all.
Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Liking and commenting on a video will help raise it up in the YouTube algorithm, help it get recommended more. More people will watch my video, and the more people who watch my video will make me feel like, oh yes, I can really invest more time into making YouTube videos. So if you do enjoy my videos, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know, have you ever tried enamel hand painting before? Were there any difficulties that you experienced? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye!